artificial intelligence will completely transform our world. But what is AI? Why will it affect you? And how can you and your business survive and thrive through the AI revolution? Welcome to AI and You. Here is your host, author, speaker, and futurist, Peter Scott.
Hi, we're at episode 318, and you are about to hear my interview with Rana Gujral, author of the new book, The AI Instinct, The Future of AI and Human Decision-Making. Now, there have been countless opportunists putting books out there to cash in on the AI wave, lots of which have been written with generative AI so they could get out there quickly. Their value is minimal at best. And for me, it's made my job of finding quality books harder because of all of the dross that I have to wade through to get to the good ones. But this is one of the good ones for all of the reasons that matter to this podcast and you, which is to say that it is deeply thoughtful, expansive, and philosophical, going far beyond what you might expect of someone emerging from the business world. And all of that, I can say, also applies to its author, Rana, who's a real polymath, someone who just can't help thinking deeply about the nature of the world. And so there are a lot of terms that came up in our conversation that I want to explain before we start, in case you're not familiar with them. Once upon a time, I would have explained what artificial general intelligence meant, but we all have some idea of that now, even if there's no common or even useful definition. There's going to be a mention of Clark and Chalmers and their extended mind thesis, which we talked about with Corinna Vold back in episodes 14 and 15, and which is the idea that if we use some device to help in our thinking, we should think of it as being part of our mind. They go back so far that their example device was a notebook, not even a computer. There are going to be a few philosophical buzzwords thrown around, but I'll just explain phenomenology, which is the study of the world from the point of view of our personal experience, looking at the world as it appears to our senses. Now, I will mention the phrase, we know more than we can tell, and Rana picks up on that as coming from Michael Polanyi, talking about the principle that we know things that we're unable to convey in language. You get the idea here of some of the territory we're going to be traversing. Scaling laws are the idea that AI performance improves as you make the models bigger, and a 2022 DeepMind study referred to a model called Chinchilla that was used to explain that. You'll hear that mentioned. Stochastic parrot is the term used to refer to LLMs as working merely by predicting the next word with some level of random variation in there. And that was originated by Emily Bender, who was on the show in episodes 257 and 258. And it's intended to counter the idea that LLMs are understanding anything, let alone conscious. Rana is CEO of Behavioral Signals, creating systems that infer intent, emotion, and deception risk from voice, deployed in applications ranging from financial services to defense. He has a TEDx talk with 1 million views and has keynoted at the World Government Summit and World Economic Forum and was named Most Influential CEO by CEO Monthly. We're going to talk about Rana's idea of artificial general experience, whether we need AI with persistent memory and universal awareness, whether AGI needs a physical experience of the world, what we call a world model, and what video generation models reveal about that. The role of empathy, whether AGI will come through an understanding that we consciously design or through emerging from a sufficiently complex general design, whether we ourselves are stochastic parrots, and AI as augmenting versus replacing human judgment. And that's just a compressed list of what we're about to cover. So let's get into the interview. Rana Gujral, welcome to AI and You. Thanks for coming on. We're here to talk about your new book, principally, The AI Instinct, The Future of AI and Human Decision-Making. Let me start out with a simple question. Why did you write this?
Honestly, it came out of a frustration with how polarized the conversation had become. On one side, you've got this almost utopian hype. AI will solve everything, effortless abundance. On the other side, existential dread. The machines are coming for us. And Both narratives miss what's actually happening right in front of us. I've spent years building AI systems and we're close to most human layers of the technology, especially where behavior, emotion, and intent matter. And what I kept noticing is that the most consequential changes don't arrive as what I would say dramatic ruptures. They arrive as defaults. So in business, in AI, recommendation surfaces before a human has fully formed an opinion. Like in tech, or say consumer tech, attention systems learn your psychology with unsettling precision. You can go on and on. Healthcare, finance, education, defense, same pattern. So AI enters as support and then as efficiency and eventually as an invisible infrastructure. So the book really came from this realization. The question is no longer whether AI is accurate. The question is whether humans remain meaningfully in control of how we think, decide, and understand the world. And there was a personal moment too. I was working on a hard problem using a model as a soundboard, and it offered an angle I hadn't considered. Like it wasn't the AI solving the problem for me, and it wasn't me solving it alone. It was genuine collaboration. So kind of like, a lock turn and a door open type of a scenario. And I thought, okay, well, this is the actual story. It's not replacement. It's not apocalypse. It's something quieter and stranger, like a species learning to think alongside a system that increasingly resembles mine. And so what I also wanted to give is people a better vocabulary. So terms like AGI have become, AGI being artificial general intelligence, obviously, have become containers for too many meanings. Like when a concept becomes everything, it can't guide engineering, policy, or public understanding. So what I ended up doing is introducing artificial general experience, hybrid cognition, ways of seeing what's actually arriving. Because I think the future isn't something that happens to us. It's something we build into ourselves.
Let's take these a step at a time. You've opened up a lot there to work with. And I just want to say that the book goes way beyond what one would expect in a niche if it was labeled artificial intelligence in business. In fact, I don't think that's where this would be shelved because it's very expansive. It reads like a PhD thesis. I mean, you defend, explain everything. You have copious citations and back all of that up. And you get into very much the philosophical angles and our future here, which looks futuristic, would have been dismissed a few years ago. And now it only looks futuristic because we think of anything more than 5 years out in AI as being futuristic. So let's start with artificial general experience. I agree with what you were saying about AGI. That's one of those terms that we used to think we knew what it meant, and it's increasingly getting away from us in much the same way that the Turing test became a non-entity as soon as we had systems capable of passing it. And I think Marvin Minsky had this term called suitcase words. He would have applied to, intelligence and other things where they could just mean anything you want when you unpack them because people do that differently. You have introduced this term artificial general experience. Unpack that for us, please.
Yeah, so the origin of AGE was actually a moment of self-observation, not a philosophical exercise. I noticed I'd stopped using AI the way I use, say, a calculator or a timer, like as a discrete tool I just pick up and put down. I was using it in a way I use my own mind, like say to draft thoughts, to test arguments, to frame decisions. And it was sitting inside a loop of attention and judgment. Once I saw that, a question surfaced that the AGI conversation just doesn't address today. I mean, what does using the system do to me over time? Like, does it build better instincts, better beliefs, continuity of judgment? Or does it produce a convincing stream of outputs that feels like thinking without actually building any? And that's when the missing axis snapped into view for me. I mean, humans don't just solve problems, right? I mean, we accumulate experience. We update from consequences. We internalize cost. We learn patterns over time. And if AI is going to sit inside the human decision-making, I mean, I don't think intelligence is enough. I mean, the system needs the relationship to time, to context, and to consequence. So AGE, artificial general experience, is the idea that the primitive shouldn't be the answer. It should be the experience, a continuous stream that binds perception, memory, intent, and consequence into something more coherent, like the way the living minds do. So not say memory just as storage, but memory as transformation. So for example, the system becomes different after it's wrong, after it causes harm, after it sees a pattern play out in the world, right? So judgment as an accumulated relationship with consequences. And here's why I think it matters practically, not just, I'd say, philosophically. Every current benchmark measures capability in isolation. Can it pass the bar exam? Can it solve the math Olympiad? Can it write the code? And those are snapshots, and none of them tell you whether the system participates in continuity, whether it can be trusted across time, whether it grows or it just performs. So until we measure the path to intelligence and the path to experience side by side, asking AGI when, which seems to be the question of the day, is generally, in my opinion, the wrong question. I mean, it's like asking when a person becomes an adult by measuring only their vocabulary. You miss the whole other dimension of what it means to be one.
And we're skirting very close to philosophy here. And we're not going to dive into that, but I feel like the ghost of Heidegger knocking on the door saying, hello, do you have some background in that? Because it feels like you're very much grounded on that kind of discourse.
Yeah, I mean, Heidegger absolutely at the door, and so is Merleau-Ponty, honestly. I mean, I have a background in it, but I call myself a serious amateur, not a trained philosopher. My degree's in computer science and management, but I've read voraciously in this space for years because you can't seriously think about AI and cognition without eventually running into these questions, right? And as Heidegger is unavoidable when you talk about tools becoming invisible, the whole idea of the radio hand where a hammer disappears into the act of hammering, it only reappears as an object when it breaks, right? That's exactly what's happening with AI right now. It's dissolving from tool into environment. When I use a model as a soundboard and it offers an angle I hadn't seen, that isn't me picking up an instrument. I mean, that's something closer to a shared horizon of understanding. I mean, the tool has receded into the activity of thinking itself. So when I try to push past pure phenomenology, is on the engineering side, right? So Heidegger can tell us what it feels like when technology becomes constitutive of our being, right? He can't tell us what to build or how to preserve agency when the system is optimizing every path for comfort. So for that, I lean on Clark and Chalmers and the extended mind thesis, right? On post-humanist thinkers like Haraway and Hales. And I try to hold that intention with people like David Deutsch, who insists knowledge is open-ended and problems are soluble. Deutsch keeps me from drifting into pure, say, contemplative frame. But you're right that the philosophical grounding is doing real work in the book. I couldn't write about hybrid cognition or about experience as the missing axis without it. And if you strip out the phenomenology, you're left with benchmarks and product roadmaps. And that's precisely the empowerish conversation I'm trying to move us past. And a question of what it means to be thinking, choosing being in the world of machine-mediated perception. I mean, that's a Heidegger question, whether we name it or not, I think.
Wow, so much that we could go down there. Let me return to what you were saying before that last question about the distinction that you're making with artificial general experience. And it seems that that might be born out of a frustration with the lack of continuity of memory and identity that large language models exhibit. You ask a question and you only have continuity of memory within that thread and not with anyone else's. And that is completely counter to the original Hollywood model or science fiction model or even predictive model that AI would be, where you have one giant AI sitting off in a computer somewhere in an enormous building, and people would ask it questions. Think about like Isaac Asimov's stories, think about Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and that AI would know about all of those conversations. And of course, we don't have that would be a massive privacy issue. We have instead all of these different instances. You get a new AI every time you connect. And that has got obvious limitations when it comes to wanting it to remember at least everything you have talked about, let alone anything that anyone else has talked about to it. If we had something closer to that Hollywood vision, if we had AI that did remember everything, and of course, they're trying to do this more and more with the large language models now, and you have them building up some system memory of who you are and other attempts like this. If we had more of that, if we had also an awareness of the passage of time, so that if you had conversations, it would know when you were pausing, it would know what the time was, and it could asynchronously come back to you the way that a human being would. Do you get closer to your idea of the artificial general experience, or is there more that we need?
You're pointing at something real. And yes, persistent memory and temporal awareness gets you closer. But I argue that they're necessary and nowhere near sufficient. What you're describing is still memory of storage. I mean, a better filing cabinet, a more attention stenographer. AGE requires memory as transformation. I mean, a system has to become different after it's wrong, different after it causes harm, different after it watches a pattern play out in the world and sees the consequence land. Storage doesn't do that on its own. Give a model perfect recall of every conversation you've ever had, and it will still cheerfully repeat the same mistake in a new register because nothing about the recall reshapes its judgment. And that's the gap, I think. So when I sketch out what an experience stack would actually need, memory is one module among several. I mean, you need a perception and world model that turns like raw input into a compact picture of what's happening and predicts what happens next. I mean, you need a attention controller that decides what matters right now. And you need valuation, some mapping from states and outcomes to felt weight, so the system knows what a choice costs. You need a narrative generator that stitches events into a running story, because coherence over time is how meaning forms, right? And you need a self model that persists, so there is an entity to hold accountable. And you need a meta control watching all of it, deciding when to widen attention, when to doubt, when to ask for help. And then this is the part people resist, right? I think you need embodiment, like some form of it. Not because every mind must be mobile. Humans aren't monoliths either, but because sensory grounding and environmental feedback are how consequence stops being abstract. So a system never feels the weight of being wrong in the world, learns a very thin kind of wisdom, in my opinion. So the Hollywood AI you're describing, I mean, continuous, temporally aware, remembering us across years, I think that's the container. I mean, AG has to be alive inside it. Otherwise, you just have a very patient database with good manners.
Are you designing AI or are you deconstructing humanity?
Both. And I think that's the honest answer, even if it's uncomfortable. I mean, I'm working on a voice AI that reads emotion and intent. And I'm doing something that looks like straightforward engineering, like signal processing, embedding models that infer risk or trust from a human voice. That's design work, right? But you cannot build systems that interpret human affect without, in the same motion, taking humanity apart. You have to ask, what is warmth in a ways? What is hesitation? What is deception? And the moment you operationalize those things, you've made a claim about what a human is. You've turned something lived into something measurable. So yes, in a very real sense, every serious AI project is also an act of reverse engineering the species. We're decomposing perception, emotion, judgment, memory into parameters, into loss functions, into architectures. And the field mostly doesn't acknowledge this. I mean, we talk like we're just building tools. We're not. I mean, we're producing implicit theories of mind and then embedding those theories into infrastructure that a billion people will use, right? So here's where it gets sharper. When you deconstruct something in order to replicate it, you also change what the original thing means, right? So once you can synthesize empathy convincingly, empathy itself becomes a category people question, right? Once you can generate a plausible voice of grief, grief has a new shadow. That's the deeper deconstruction, not the technical one. It's a cultural one. So when I keep insisting that the work has to be done with the philosophical conversation running in parallel, and if you're going to take humanity apart to build these systems, we owe it to ourselves to be conscious of what we're deciding is essential and we're deciding is, I guess, negotiable, right? So otherwise, we're not designing AI. We're just quietly redesigning humans, and we call it progress.
I've always felt that the technology advances will take care of themselves. Our real job is to build a better human. You compare different approaches to AGI in the book, and there seems to be a conflict that you've exposed there between people saying that AGI must arise from some more complicated design than what we have at the moment for AI, but not saying what it is, and people who say that AGI must arise from an emergent design or emerge from some other design as an emergent property, but saying that large language models are not that, even though there is so much that's emergent from large language models at the moment. Where do you stand on that axis? Do you think that we need fundamentally different systems to get AGI, and that there will be some way in which we can say, yes, that is the design that will give us that, versus whatever design we have, AGI will only come out of it as an emergent property because intelligence, true general intelligence, contains so much to it that we don't know, that principle of we know more than we can tell.
I love the way you frame that. I mean, we know more than we can tell. I mean, that's felony, and it's exactly the knot at the center of this debate. That's where I actually land. I don't think it's an either or, and I think the field's insistence on treating it as one is doing real damage. The loudest voices on both sides are staking careers on their pathway, being the pathway, and that's the kind of tribalism is what tips us into another AI winter. My honest position, LLMs are not a dead end, and they're also not the gold mine. I mean, scaling has delivered real, repeatable capability jumps. Chinchilla style, their scaling laws are not nothing. Barinholtz makes the case I find genuinely compelling that next token prediction may be closer to how the human linguistic engine actually works than critics want to admit. So when Gary Marcus and Jan LeCun say LLMs are just stochastic parrots, I think they're overreaching. Something real is happening in there. But I also think LeCun is right that you don't get grounded intelligence without causal models, world models, perception loops, self-supervised prediction of the physical and the social environment. So language without grounding is a very fluent narrator with no idea what the story is about. So I guess the way I hold it is architectural. So LLMs are the narrative cortex. I mean, they give you coherence, syntax, inference, and a running voice. But you wrap that inside an agent that also has a world model, causal reasoning, memory that transforms rather than stores, and some form of embodiment that so the consequence lands. That's not one pathway winning, that's integration. And to your deeper point about emergence, I mean, I'm suspicious of anyone who says intelligence will just show up if we scale enough compute. Peter Bach put it well, weak emergence is just two descriptions of the same process. It doesn't magic new functionality into being. We still have to implement the thesis, right? So what brings me back to the missing axis, I mean, even if we nailed architecture for AGI, we haven't touched experience. And without experience, capability, without judgment, we build something powerful, but I think it's profoundly untrustworthy.
And talking about experience, and at this rate, the number of footnotes that I'm going to have to explain before this interview starts in the prologue is multiplying rapidly. If we think about Nagel's question, what is it like to be a bat? I just found myself asking, what is it like to be a stochastic parrot? And how would I know, how would you know, how would anyone know if we weren't already stochastic parrots?
That's the vertigo, isn't it? Nagel's question was supposed to be a fence around biological subjectivity, this claim that there's something like that to be a bat, echolocating through a night sky, and no amount of third-person description gets you inside that. But the stochastic parrot framing was meant to do the opposite. I mean, it was meant to say, look, there's nothing it's like to be a language model. It's just token prediction, statistical mimicry, no there, right? And so what I find fascinating is that Ilan Barinholtz's work actually collapses that distinction from the other direction. I mean, his argument is that language operates as a closed self-referential system. I mean, the word red doesn't point at redness. It just sits in relation to blood, apple, color, sunset. And it's navigating the topology. It's not describing a world. And so that's true for the model. It may also be true for us, right? At least in the linguistic layer of cognition. I mean, we are in that same specific sense doing what the parrot does. The mimicry isn't fake. It's just convergent.
Yeah.
So how would you know? I mean, I think my honest answer is you probably can't, not from the inside, right? My TEDx talk gets at this. The brain is a prediction machine. It's editing sensory input, filling gaps, generating a word for you to inhabit that you then mistake for the world itself. you're already living inside a construction, right? The felt sense of being, continuous experiencing self is either an output of the system, is itself an output of the system, not a window onto some deeper truth. That's what I think. So where I land, and this is where I've shifted from, I'd say, harder determinism, is that a question isn't whether we're stochastic parrots. I mean, it's whether the stack that generates our parroting also generates attention, valuation, a self-model, narrative continuity, felt stakes, right? All that stuff. That bundle is what I would call experience. A pure next token predictor doesn't have it. A human embedded in a body with consequent does. Whether the future system could is the exact question AG focuses us to sit with, honestly, rather than just like wave away and dismiss it.
And I'll ground this more in a moment. I feel personally as though I do stochastic parrot, although I'm not one, but I sense that some large fraction of the words that I am saying are just generated by what the word before them was. And so there's an amount of redundancy and compressibility that's possible there. So I feel like I've got a lot of the stochastic parrot going, but it's something I own rather than something I am. Now, talk about world models. You are in the camp of saying that artificial general intelligence and probably also artificial general experience is going to require a world model, an understanding of how the physical world works. And I was much more firmly in that camp 5 years ago. And now AI has done things that I didn't think were possible without a world model. You look at the videos that are generated and you would have said, I would have said 5 years ago, you can't do that without understanding not just ideas like ray tracing, but luminosity and all the principles of physics, like how objects bounce off each other, squishiness versus hardness, friction, countless equations and formulas for physics. And generative AI makes videos that work without knowing any of that. It's amazing that it can do that, and yet it does. And it prompts the question, can the imitation of something be as good as the real thing? What do you think?
The video generation point is such a good pressure test on my own position, and I want to sit with it honestly rather than just dodge it. Sora, Veo, the current generation of video models produce clips that look like they understand momentum, occlusion, refraction, clock dynamics, and they emphatically do not. What they have is a very high dimensional statistical envelope over how pixels tend to evolve given other pixels. And within the envelope, it's stunning. I mean, step outside it and ask for something the training distribution didn't cover, and you get the tells. Objects that pass through each other, hands that grow fingers, liquid that behaves like fabric for a moment before the model course corrects. And the failures are diagnostic, right? So they tell you there's no underlying physics engine, just an extraordinarily good surface pattern. So to your question, like, can the imitation be as good as the real thing for generating a plausible 10-second clip? Arguably, yes. And getting better. I mean, for anything that requires acting in the world, no, I don't think it's a matter of scale. I think here's why. I think a world model is, in the sense, Lacoon means, and the sense that I've come to hold, isn't just about producing pretty output. It's about being able to answer counterfactuals. What if I push this cup instead of that one? What happens in 3 seconds if I don't intervene? If I'm wrong about the mass, what breaks in my prediction? I mean, that's the machinery Mazuro and Dreamer are gesturing at, right? Latent imagination, planning inside a compact learning simulator. The video models don't do that. I mean, they render, they don't reason forward. So the tell for me is sample efficiency, right? Turtle learns object permanence, gravity, basic solidity in mass with a tiny fraction of the data a generative model consumes. And the gap is the world model doing work. The child isn't memorizing pixel trajectories. She's building a compressed causal spine. So imitation can get astonishingly close for consumption. It can't substitute for causal machinery. You need to act, plan, and be accountable in the real world. I mean, and that's where grounding stops being optional, I think, right? So which loops back to why I think AG needs embodiment. I mean, consequence is what forces the model past mimicry.
Let's look at this like a quality control problem. Human beings make mistakes. Artificial intelligence makes mistakes. And when AI makes fewer mistakes overall than humans, we feel that it's a good substitute. if self-driving cars can be 10 times safer than a human driver, then we will give at least insurance discounts, if not at some point legislate them in the same way that we do seatbelts, even though the AI will have failure modes that humans don't. Just in the same way that there are situations where a seatbelt will cost you your life instead of saving it. Could you tolerate an artificial general intelligence that had failure modes that were still due to the lack of a world model and showed up that way, but were otherwise fit for purpose because of how good they were in every other respect?
Yeah, the honest answer is that the line isn't fixed, and pretending it is has caused a lot of damage that we're already seeing. I mean, the line moves based on how the system is designed and how it's marketed, I guess, and what the human is actually able to do when things go sideways. Like Tesla's autopilot is legally augmentation. The driver is responsible, but the marketing, the name, and the smoothness of the experience, all of it pushes the human towards functional replacement. And then there's a crash, and we discover the driver had been treating it as a replacement for months. And the company points at the fine print, right? That's not augmentation. That's what Medellin Elish calls a moral crumple zone. I mean, the human absorbs blame for a system they were quietly encouraged to overtrust. So when I think about the line, I don't think about the capability of AI. I think about three things. First, does the human retain meaningful control? Not just nominal control. Nominal control is signature at the bottom of the file. Meaningful control means you actually have the skill, the time, and the information to intervene. Like, let's say, if you remember the Air France 447, that's a tragic version of this. Pilots nominally in charge, right? Practically de-skilled by years of automation, and in the aircraft back in the worst possible moment, right? So that's what happened there. So second is the system exposing its uncertainty. Augmentation tells you and it's guessing. Replacement actually hides the seams, right? If an AI recommends a treatment or a sentence or a hire and doesn't surface its confidence, its alternatives, its counterfactuals, it's not augmenting your judgment. It's just substituting it for while letting you keep liability. And third, I mean, this is the one I keep coming back to, actually. Does using a system build me or hollow me out? A center configuration in chess makes the human sharper. A cyborg configuration in surgery extends what the surgeon can perceive. But a system that quietly does the thinking for you while you sign off, that's de-skilling dressed up as productivity. That's what I think. I mean, so the line I care about isn't augmentation versus replacement as a category. It's whether the design preserves human agency, dignity, capacity to grow. I mean, everything else is just marketing.
That's the end of the first half of this interview. And you can see right there one of the reasons we split these up. Because I, for one, need time to go away and let all that sink in. Believe me, my brain was hot from being overclocked by the time we got to the end of the interview, so we'll finish this one on next week's show. By the way, if any of you thought that in the last 3 episodes that I must have done AI voice generation for my monologues because I sounded so resonant and deep, no, that's not it. Truth is, I was just getting over a head cold, and it made my voice sound so great I thought I should record as much of the show as I could while it lasted. There you go. But it'll make good source data if I ever do need to do voice replacement. In today's news ripped from the headlines about AI engineer and amateur linguist Tom Domino is claiming to have deciphered Linear A, a Bronze Age Minoan language. He used Python scripts and Claude code to go through digitized databases. His work is being reviewed by researchers at Cambridge and Rutgers. If confirmed, it would be the biggest breakthrough in historical cryptography since Michael Ventris deciphered Linear B in 1952. My take on this is to observe that Domino did this with manifestly much less experience and time than Ventris, but he had the help of AI. So what else that we're used to thinking of as requiring decades of research is possible to the determined amateur wielding a stable of LLMs? Next week, we'll conclude the interview with Rana Gujral, when we'll talk about, here you will see why we didn't try and fit this all in one episode, purism versus pragmatism, hybrid minds, and Rana's framework of models for those, and how to manage governance of a company that's using hybrid minds, incorporating Rana's idea of a synthetic empathy layer for AI, and how to manage the boundaries between human and AI control, and where we need to make sure we continue to be challenged. And finally, AI consciousness and how to integrate these high-level concepts into an AI-forward business. That's next week on AI and You. Until then, remember, no matter how much computers learn how to do, it's how we come together as humans that matters.
That's all for this episode of AI and You. Please leave a rating and comment and share with your friends. Get the book Artificial Intelligence and You and see more videos and articles at aiandyou.net. That's aiandyou.net, where you can also send us your questions. Thank you for listening.